and today I'm joined by Amelin Carroll, also known as Babs. Is that right?
That is right. Yes. Great to be here. Thank you for the invite, Aaron.
Uh, Thanks for coming on the show, Babs. Could you just tell people a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, I am not unlike your listeners, maybe a different gender, depending upon the demographics of the folks we're connecting with. But, I'm just somebody out here trying to live life, trying to face the big questions, and trying to figure out who I am in comparison to what the world tells me I'm supposed to be, or the expectations that I may borrow from others around me to get me through one event or another. So, yeah, I started out my world in following the agenda of those around me. I went to college, excelled in college, went into the corporate world, and excelled there, and yet was very unfulfilled. And so back in 2015, I decided that I was going to take a leap of faith and figure out who I am. And so it's brought me to a place where I don't consider myself a coach. I consider myself a travel partner, because what journey in life isn't made better with the right travel partner? And so now what I get to do is I get to be the person for others that I wish had been there for myself in those darkest hours. And I love it. I enjoy it, and I feel more fulfilled today than I ever was with the accolade in the corporate world.
I love that. And you know what? I think out of all my guests that I've had on, they've all had kind of that similar transition. They may have been in some of them in corporate, some of them in different roles, but they've all had a similar transition where actually you realize what's important in life.
Yeah.
Um, it's because for some reason we start, especially when we're young, I think we start off with that kind of external success we're looking at. We're looking at all that kind of, materialistic things, or I look successful because I got this job, or I've done this, done that, etc. But it doesn't actually fulfill us or bring us happiness.
Yeah.
And it takes time to realize that, I guess.
Well, I think one of the things I've noticed is that literally from the time we're toddlers, we are the words, the conversation around us is always, oh, so and so is such a good boy or such a good girl based on what we're doing. And whether it's learning to walk or learning to talk or learning to share our toys, it's all about being a good girl or a good boy. And so as we then kind of matriculate into the grammar school, and oh, he's such a good athlete, and so we begin to get that value from what people are recognizing in us. And so we tend to migrate in those areas, and there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, just recently I've begun to call those borrowed beliefs. uh, we begin to take on what we think about ourselves based on the feedback we get from others. And that's all good and well. It carries us to a certain point. But then in a moment of crisis, in a moment of challenge, if all we have is the external to rely on, then the internal feels like it's crumbling. When in reality, what the internal's doing is it's calling out. It's calling out for acceptance and invitation into the experience and the opportunity to help us through whatever it is we're facing. But nobody ever tells us that. So those first times going through that challenge of needing to go internal to work through something is really scary and awkward, just because we've not had that experience yet. So those borrowed beliefs can be really helpful, but man, if we hold on to them too long, they can also be a real disservice to us.
Absolutely. And I think we kind of forced, don't we, through our younger years in school and everything to kind of conform with everything. So like push to conform. And they are the kind of them younger years when we should be actually exploring who we are, trying to
Yeah.
kind of figure out and having that freedom to explore a bit more. Whereas, as kind of parents and as in schools as school teachers and stuff like that, we're kind of pushing people to all behave the same. No, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. We don't let them have that expression and that freedom to kind of really discover who they are and be creative and make mistakes essentially.
Well, and as a society, what we fail to realize that we're doing in that space is that when you have a younger person who wants to explore, that wants to discover and wants to do it different than what would be considered the norm, is they're somehow, they're somehow acting out. There's these labels that we put on those individuals, and instead of championing that exploration and that discovery, there's almost a punitive approach to it that is a marker that I think so often people take with them emotionally as they continue to grow. It's like, no, when I go outside the box, this is what happens. And yet inside the box doesn't feel comfortable for me. And so we are actually creating generations of individuals that don't know who they are or what they want, because to be who they feel they're called to be, they're labeled as, acting out or rebellious or mavericks. And those labels put such a weight and a pressure on those individuals that it shifts who they are. And for me, that's really sad. It's really sad that we do it so unconsciously, but we pretty much do it pretty universally, across. You're in the UK, I'm here in the United States. I think we have the same experience regardless of what country we come from. There's just this expectation that we'll grow up and act a certain way, and that outside of that box is somehow wrong. And different doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it different.
Yeah, and I seen something the other day. I can't remember where I stole it from, but I've definitely stolen it from somebody else. But they were saying that we have all this thing as well about, oh, kids spend so much time online on their devices and stuff like that. But then this person, I don't know who it is, but they put a very well reasoned argument for it, saying that, well, actually that's the only place that they can be creative and free. So, of course they're going to go to that because that's what they want. They want that creativity. They want that freedom that we're just not allowing them because we're forcing them to be, a certain way at all times, really, because they get it at school, they get it at home because we want, our children to behave in a way that pleases us and stuff. And it's just, they just have that no room for creativity and to explore.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know who you stole it from, but I agree completely.
I don't know. I'd give them credit if I could, but I can't remember. My mind's like jelly. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's something to be said as well about kind of learning to be vulnerable and learning to make mistakes and learning to be free in that way. Because so it's been very difficult for me. I've tried, and I'm still on that journey really of just being more vulnerable, more open, just being myself more. Um, but it's harder once it's been ingrained in you for a long time to kind of break
Oh.
through that.
Well, and the people around you look for you to be a certain way. The hardest part about us evolving as our own person isn't the evolving, it's the people around us. It's the I had a conversation with somebody recently about the idea of comfort zones. And during that conversation, it became so apparent to me, and like the clarity was almost awestruck, because comfort zones are less about where I'm comfortable and more about where everyone around me is comfortable with me being. And yet we take it on as this thing that we're not comfortable. Well, and so this idea of growing, evolving, transforming, just growing up, um, is made so much more complicated by the comfort zones of everyone around us. Hey, I'm used to Aaron being this way. And Aaron's had this aha moment or this unfoldment in his experience, and he wants to live, this tiny aspect of his life in a different way. But that difference is uncomfortable for others around you. And so what do? Well, we want them to be happy. So often we fail to weigh the pros and cons of their happiness versus our fulfillment, our authenticity. And we vilify words like vulnerable. It's not manly to be vulnerable. And if you're a woman and you're vulnerable, you're too sensitive. So there's these pigeonholes that we put people into, as opposed to recognizing that the ebb and flow, the discovery, the unfoldment, the evolution is part of why we're all here. and we're all going to do it at a different rate. Not everybody grows in the same space or at the same time or in the same areas. And yet your growth being different than mine doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it different. And I would love to see us as a human, society. I would love to see us learn to champion those differences, those moments of evolution and growth, and stop being so caught up on words and the value of a word. Vulnerable. Are you kidding me? Be vulnerable. I love that because that means you can be authentic. And I would much rather spend time with people who are authentic than people who are trying to please me. And I have to figure out what the value is of what they're really saying because I know that their aim is to please as opposed to just be themselves.
Yeah, I find it quite frustrating. And, I did it for years. I was, trying to please people and fit inside that box and try to behave in a way that people expected me to behave. And all it did was just keep me from being happy, really, because I wasn't able to live the life that I wanted to live, the way I wanted to live. Um, and it's just, and I feel that this is part of why I've created this podcast, to be honest, and that's where kind of where the name comes from, because not to conform, not to be like everybody else. It's a case of I want to try to help people get to that point at a younger age, because I think as society we're failing people in that way. We're not letting them have that expression and figure out, you know, who they really are, or like even getting them to ask the questions. Really, are we? We're just everything is focused on, oh, you get your exam results and qualifications, and then get a good job. It's all external focus all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, it becomes this thing that it's like there's some trajectory that we must follow. And this idea of happiness, what I'm learning through a very similar journey, because like you, first 35 years of my life, I was a master at attempting to keep the people around me happy. But what I came to realize is that they weren't as happy as I thought they were because they were missing the same thing I was. And what they are missing, what people are missing, is a sense of fulfillment. And happiness, in my opinion, is very different than fulfillment. Fulfillment may say, happiness to me is very externally driven. I've got enough to eat. I've got, I'm warm or I'm not too hot or too cold. People around me love me. To me, that's all, it's fleeting because it's dependent upon the circumstances around us for me to be happy. But a sense of fulfillment is something very different. And I think so many of us are beginning to recognize the difference between happy and fulfilled. And for me, fulfilled is being okay with who I am, regardless of the external circumstances. Um, Back in 2022, I had a stroke, and that stroke left me a quadriplegic. And I was the epitome of people pleaser before, and I was constantly going and constantly doing because to me the activity was a sign of success. You don't get success if you're not constantly on the go, constantly working towards something, constantly pushing. And so life gave me the opportunity to begin to look at life differently. And when you're a person that is fiercely independent and very success motivated and driven, and by success, I'm talking about the external accolades, the external benchmarks, the external, you know, points of recognition that those around me would notice, to then being in a position where I can't even sit up in the bed by myself. I can't feed myself. I can't walk across a room. And so this space of literally relying on someone else, it was almost like this aha moment of spending all of these years trying to make sure that everyone around me was happy. Now I needed to learn to ask for what I needed, determine the difference between what I needed and what I wanted, and to be able to ask for that unapologetically. That my asking for anything is not a sign of weakness. it's not a sign that I'm not living up to societal expectations and standards and that I'm somehow less than. Asking for help is actually a recognition that we're here to walk each other home and that we can't possibly have all of the answers all of the time. And that's the beauty and wonder of living as part of humanity, is that what I may need may be the gift that someone else has to offer. And yet, that realization, as wonderful as it was for me in the very beginning, it was very hard, because just because we are growing and evolving doesn't mean those around us are. And so for those around me, they were floored when I began to ask for help and support. And that made me very self-conscious. So I had to really hold fast to this new awareness that asking for help was not weakness, because there was such this grandstanding, this accolade about, oh, she's asking for help. She never asks for help. We're so proud of you. Oh, for the love of everything good. Can it just be? Does it not have to be good or bad? Can it just be? And can we not just grow and love and support one another, regardless of what the circumstances are? So that internal fulfillment is what we're all truly seeking. And that internal fulfillment is about authenticity. It's about identity. It's about not not borrowing the beliefs and the agenda of society and parents and professors and friends and coworkers, but really exploring life to find out what's going to make our heart sing, motivate us, give us passion to waking up each morning.
Yeah, and I think there's an element as well. We go through life, we try to control everything, right?
Mhm.
And there's that kind of, it's learning to let go of that control as well, and realizing that we're passengers in life. Really, we think we're in control of all this stuff, but realistically, we're in control of very, very little.
Right.
So, and sooner we can kind of appreciate that and realize that, I think we find more beauty in kind of the mundane daily stuff that we do, and the relationships that we have, and we realize that how fortunate we are. Especially in the Western society, we're very fortunate, aren't we? We all of our needs are generally met. We've got good healthcare, and nice homes, and we're well
Yes.
looked after. And I think we take it for granted sometimes, kind of trying to control everything and focus on this external life, and looking, oh, this person's more successful than me. I need to get there. You know, when you get there, what then? It's not going to bring you any fulfillment. You just,
Well, then you're on to the next checkbox. Great, I checked that box. But did I learn anything? Did I grow? Am I taking anything forward? I think about so often, we hear these stories about what we have deemed to be a highly successful people, in the latter years of their life, or even on their deathbed, saying, I only wish I had, and I mean, there's songs written about it and there's stories written about it. And yet it's still somehow taboo to live differently. It's not, I think there's a growing acceptance in society of learning to live from a place of authenticity. And by authenticity, I'm not talking about, being rogue or maverick. I'm just saying knowing who we are, being willing to do the work to figure out what makes my life sing, that passion, what I feel called to do and how I feel called to show up. And yet we still have this disconnect. So I love that you're doing this podcast in a place where you're giving the example of so many of us that come to share this space with you and your listeners, of doing it different, and doing it, again, different doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it different. And so it's almost like in our societies that seeing someone else do it is almost the permission that we think we need to do it ourselves. And
uh,
we'll just say it out loud. We don't need permission. If you're listening today and you're wondering about what life is supposed to look like for you, you don't need permission to explore life differently. You don't need permission to ask the questions. But if you feel like you do, you have it. Yeah, it's like that permission is granted to you by the universe. It's granted to you by divine source, whatever that higher power is that you may believe in. That permission to be authentically you and to explore it in ways that are exciting and attractive to you, you've got it. Go for it.
Absolutely. I think it's really, really important for people to see other people doing it, especially if you're kind of maybe in the younger generation, because a lot of people do get to this point where they kind of realize, fulfillment isn't that material success. Um, some people never do, sadly, but a lot of people do. But generally, from my experience, it tends to happen kind of later on in life, kind of late 30s plus. Um, and I'd like to help people get there sooner, to be honest. Because they're missing out on so much. And as part of my research for the show, I found a quote by Mark Twain that I quite liked, and it said, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." And it's that
Mm.
day that you find out why is that I'm trying to help people get to, really, and trying to bring that forward so it's earlier in people's life so they can, truly enjoy and who they are and what they want to do.
Right, right. Well, and I think too, it speaks to so much of the research talks about the mental health of younger generations. And my opinion would be is that part of the increase in mental health challenges in our younger generations is because innately they know there's a conflict there between who they're called to be and who they think they're expected to be by society. And that conflict, that conformity is not as comfortable as it once was in our younger days. And so that, to me, that manifests in these mental health challenges that are being experienced at at, at record numbers. And so I'm a believer of, you look for the good even in the midst of the ick. And to me, I had to find, why do we have such a mental health crisis in the world? And why is it that so much of those that are experiencing those mental health challenges are in the younger generations? And to me, part of that answer very likely is that there is a knowing in the younger generations that what is being expected of them, what is being put upon them by society that we've all lived through, they're more willing to acknowledge the conflict or acknowledge the synchronicity isn't there. Aaron, as you and I were growing up, you don't question it. It was seen as disrespectful. And there's an opening to thought, and yet the thought isn't quite open enough to where we can accept, people challenging the norm, and that be okay and celebrated even. And so the feeling, that resonance, that disconnect that those younger generations are feeling, I've my opinion would be is that that's coming out in this mental health crisis that we're seeing worldwide amongst those Gen Z, millennials, those younger generations, because you and I didn't have permission to question the norm when we were their age. And yet there's an invitation to do it, but not quite yet an acceptance. And because there's not the acceptance, there's this conflict that's created that, again, I think to me, it speaks to our mental health crisis. If you're going to give me permission, then why can you not accept what the outcome of that is? Or why can you not just walk along with me as I'm exploring? Why do I have to be there? Whether it's gender identity or, racial identity. I mean, there's just so much that or earlier generations didn't question because it wasn't okay to question. And now you can't but question it. And yet there's some expectation that you should have if you're going to question, you should have the answer. there's not grace given for the exploration and the unfoldment of that. And so, as younger people are looking for their identity, whether it be externally or internally, us as older generations are not as ready to accept the exploration phase and feel like we have to have some comment on it. And so I think that the good in that is that there is an opening. The challenging in that is that for those who are in the midst of that discovery process, we all need to get there a little faster in loving them right where they're at and not needing them to have an answer, not needing them to even know the question they're sitting in, but just simply accepting and loving and allowing them to belong without demonstrating, performing, being something that we need them to be in order for us to be happy.
Yeah, I think it's almost like we discussed previously about that safety of kind of knowing, and this kind of happens with all the generations. I think the new generation comes through, they do things differently, and they push boundaries that the older generation never did, and it makes the older generation uncomfortable, and they
Right.
can't kind of and it's actually safer if you behave this way because this is the way everybody's always behaved through my life, so I need you to fit into this category, please. That's kind of how it goes, right?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of the evolution of humanity. I think for people that have a faith background, and whether it be Christian or Muslim, it matters not. But for someone who has studied the texts of multiple faith backgrounds, one of the things that I've noticed is that while any individual spiritual text may be inspired divinely, it's still written by humans. And so, an example of what I'm talking about here is the disparity between the God in the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. And it wasn't that it what I'm learning is that it wasn't that God was changing, it was that the evolution of humans was changing in how they were working out their relationship to God. And in the Old Testament, they needed structure. They needed, they were looking for someone to just tell them what to do. I mean, so much so that the Jewish faith has 600 and some odd laws just for day to day life. So they were looking for something to tell them who they are and how they were to be. And as humanity evolved, you move into the New Testament, some, thousands of years later, depending upon the history that you as history as you understand it. And now you have this divine being living a human experience that says, forget all, it's not about all the rules and laws, it's about treating each other as you would want to be treated and bringing it down into a language that we can all understand. And so then fast forward 2000 years, we're still in that evolution process of just figuring it all out and wanting, because we've got this human nature to want to be right. And so if I have figured it out for my generation and then the next generation comes along and they want to do it different, wait a minute, I did all this work and this is what was right for me. But it doesn't necessarily have to make it right for the next generation. And we get to learn to have that grace and to give that space for things to be different.
Yeah, and I think things have changed massively in the last kind of 20 years with social media and how widespread the internet is, because now it's a global society now that we're navigating, rather than just it used to be just your predominantly your local community, and then essentially your nation, really, I suppose. um and then we kind of globalized a little bit with kind of air travel and everything else, and then
Mhm.
it's got to the point now with the acceleration with social media and the internet has just been massive. So in the UK, we know what's happening in the US all the time, and you know what's happening all over the world and stuff. So, and this we're communicating with people all over the world. Look at us now, just talking
Yeah.
as we are, um, and it's had a massive change in society. And I don't think we've kind of settled and evolved to adapt to it quite yet. I think that's still an ongoing process, to be fair.
Oh, absolutely. I could not agree with you more that we are, I think, probably in the early stages of that evolving to be a global society as opposed to a local community, and learning how to balance the two, because both still exist, and yet so often there would seem to be a disparity between the two. And it's because we have grown up so often in a black or white world. And it's not that life was ever black or white, but that's the approach that we took. That was the underlying philosophy that we were taught. And so we took that up. And now we're finding that, there are 50 shades of gray. There are a million shades of blue. There are 60 shades of, whatever those numbers are, they're innumerable. But the point being is that the difference is good. And so often we are taught that change or different is wrong or bad, because if we do something different, we're often punished for it. If we do something against what our friends would do or our parents had told us, there's a punitive response to that, whether it be discipline or shunning or bullying. It's like we all know what that is, and now we're experiencing that on a global level and not just our local community. So how do we balance the two of those? And I don't know, but I do agree with you. We're definitely at the early stages of figuring that out, and failing, really failing in some aspects of that. And yet, there is hope, there is light, there is grace, because They Not Like Us podcast is one of many avenues whereby which we're calling out the evolution, the change, and the okayness. Look, it doesn't even have to be wonderful, but the okayness of just simply being ourselves and exploring that process and discovering that fresh and new. For it to just be okay is the first step. And that reminder that you bring to your audience consistently is, I think, how we get there.
Yeah, and I think it's again, we've touched on a lot of these points really already. I think it comes back to that kind of control thing and realizing that with all these complexities that come with this, new global society that we're trying to navigate, we don't have all the answers ourselves, and kind of it's going to take time to figure this stuff out. If it ever gets figured out, because it's always evolving, the world's always evolving, stuff's always changing. Who knows? You
Right.
could have Tesla robots running around the place soon.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's a case of we got to just relinquish control a little bit sometimes and just let things play out and just like I say, just be vulnerable, build genuine relationships, and try to support each other through all the complexities, and to get to somewhere where we can have happiness and fulfillment really.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a space that really calls us this idea of relinquishing control. Um, for me, as a type A personality, now a quadriplegic, I've done a deep dive on this idea of control versus command. And it's interesting because there's so much in life that we may watch a movie or something and really enjoy it. And then 5 years later, something happens and a scene in that movie comes back as if it was just watched, 10 minutes ago. And so I am a complete proponent of acknowledging that control is a misunderstanding of what we're striving for to begin with, or that we would ever attain, because control is an impossibility. But command is a space of really bringing into light the importance of knowing who we are, knowing what our passion is and what our calling is, and living that to its fullest. And for me, the difference came in watching a number of years ago, Apollo 13, the 50th anniversary of landing on the moon. That movie, the audio was actually taken directly from audio that was recorded during the space flight. And so there was this one scene, they're in, they're at the command center, and it's black and white, and they've got all these computer monitors and guys in white shirts and skinny black ties and black pants and black, rim glasses, and smoking up a storm. And all of a sudden I realized is you saw the graphic of the shuttle in on that big screen in the front of the command center. And so I did a little bit of research, and for every monitor, they had upwards of 6 to 8 people who were trained on whatever that monitor was focusing on. Because not one person was responsible or accountable for the lives and the totality of this excursion going to the moon. And oh, by the way, they're not just in flight outside of Earth's orbit from 8 to 5, they're up there 24/7. And so the importance of this command center where we bring together the good, the expert, the knowledge, the passion of each of these individual people, that without their expertise, we have an incomplete picture. We have an incomplete structure to support these individuals who have left Earth's atmosphere. And so that celebration, like, when the space shuttle touches back down, or the shuttle touches back down, there's this huge cheer, in the command center. And I now recognize that when I try to do someone else's job, I may literally be taking the life of someone else. And I say that in that way because life isn't about the breathing and the heartbeat. Life is about the sense of fulfillment. And if I'm trying to do a job that's not mine because I think I need to control everything, then what I'm doing is I'm essentially sending a message to the people around me that their passion, their calling is not important enough for me to welcome them in, to bring that into my experience. And so I send this mixed message when I'm trying to control everything, but then I tell people I want them to be authentically themselves. So this idea of command is absolutely, I believe, where we're called to operate out from, because not only does it allow us to bring ourself to the table full and unfettered, but it also invites those around us to come and contribute, and for their contribution to have as much value as mine does. And that shifts the way conversations happen. That shifts how relationships unfold. It shifts the dynamic within a business, within a family, within a friendship, when there's not a sense of, if it's going to be, it's up to me. It's, what can you bring? What can I receive from you that honors who you are and what you're called to?
Yeah. Ironically, the moment you surrender is the moment you become more powerful. So it's
Exactly.
quite the paradox, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think too that part of that for me is this idea of divine order versus human order. And when we are so focused on pleasing the human component of our experience, we do that from human order. Well, in my opinion, divine order, it's not the same logic as human order. And so when we, as you said, when we surrender, that's the moment when that strength, when that powerfulness, when that presence really shows up differently for us in a way that we could not have imagined, could not have created, because we're recognizing that there's something beyond me in this moment that's bringing about whatever this moment is.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before in the podcast multiple times. It's about living in their moments as well. You know,
Mhm.
just experiencing their moments. Like if we try to control everything, we're not actually in the moment because we're trying to, we're not letting it play out. We're restricting it into to try and mold it into what we want it to be.
Right.
Um, whereas there's much more to be gained from actually just experiencing these things.
Yeah. To learn to sit in the middle of life and not label it good, bad, mine, yours is a skill. But that skill can bring such a sense of peace. And I think a better view on reality, a better understanding of what our experience is. But you're right, without sitting in this moment, right here, right now, which is all there is, we can't change the past. And we really, whether we want to admit it or not, we can't control the future. So if we want that sense of fulfillment, being able to sit in the present moment is the first step in that space.
Absolutely, and we've spoken about kind of vulnerability, and I just want to make it clear, like, this vulnerability isn't winning or losing. It's having the courage to kind of show up, even though you can't control the outcomes. So the outcomes could still be good or bad, but it's having that courage to kind of be yourself and be vulnerable and just kind of expose yourself to life, really.
Yeah. And if you need to see your behavior in a good or bad label space, because I believe in building bridges. We can't, if labels is how we got here, we can't just wake up tomorrow and say, I'm not going to live with labels anymore. And so if we need to build a bridge to get there, let's look at the idea of vulnerability a little differently. Because as you said, vulnerability isn't about weakness. Vulnerability isn't about surrender. Vulnerability is really about standing up for yourself. But that also requires you to do the exploration for what self is for you and what that means and what you're called for. And to do it not, and when I say unapologetically, I don't mean like in your face and rogue, but we don't always need to explain to others where we're at as we're figuring things out. And so if what would your life look like if instead of vulnerability being a weakness, of surrender and giving up, if vulnerability is about calling into being your own being, giving yourself the space, the invitation to figure it out. Because as you said, consequences are going to be the same. It's not like it shifts what shows up in our experience. It shifts how we receive it. It shifts how we engage with it. And ultimately, I would say that it shifts how we look at life. So things that we might have seen as bad before, we now actually may see as good. But if in this moment we can see vulnerability as a strength, as a calling card, as an invitation, if we look at it differently, it's easier to sit in that spot of vulnerability, to sit quietly in this moment and not need to orchestrate the next one. So if you need to tell yourself something different, do it. Do it. We get the permission to do that because we are human beings. And so build that bridge for yourself if you don't have anyone else in your experience doing it for you. Just because just because many people see vulnerability as a weakness doesn't mean that you can't own it as a strength that will help carry you toward whatever it is you feel like you're being called to.
Yeah, and it's crucial, right? Because we'll have all this. So life will throw things at us, we're the star in our own movie, right? We're the center of our own life, aren't we? So life will throw all this stuff at us, and we decide how we kind of react to that, how we kind of deal with that moving forward. Not to say that we won't get sometimes an uncontrollable emotional response, but emotions are fleeting in nature and they don't last for a long time. So then after that emotion is passed, we can then choose how we move forward, how we, deal with what life's thrown at us. And I think that is the key, because we can dwell on something that's happened and we can hold on to it, hold on to it, hold on to it. Um, but all we doing then is we reliving it in them new moments. We're giving it that power over ourselves. And that's not to say it's easy to let go of things or to push them away. But if we actively work towards that, then we can, how we interact with life will get better, and then our perception of life will become better, and then it kind of snowballs from there. Really.
Well, and I think that it's all about too this acknowledging of that moment, like you said, because it's without that moment of change in our thought, if we don't allow ourselves to explore the change. I grew up in a household where essentially the philosophy was you've made your bed, so now you lay in it. You've made your commitment, so now you're committed to it. You've made your choice, so the consequences are X. And there's a truth to that. But here's the rest of the story. I make my bed every day. I can make a different choice in the next moment if I choose to. And it's such a freeing space to be. For me, when I had that aha moment about, I literally was making the bed, I'm 40 some years old, making the bed and realizing I do this every day. And I was feeling very overwhelmed because I had overcommitted myself, but I had committed. So I wasn't about to go to these people and say, look, I need to take a step back, or I need to remove myself, because I'd made this commitment, and my commitment was my word, and my word was my reputation, and my reputation was my identity. And in that moment of making that bed on that Thursday morning, I remember it like it was yesterday. That recognition that I make my bed every day was such a freeing moment that I sat down and I said, okay, here are the things that I have committed to. And here are the things I'm not passionate about that I am committed to. And then I went to those individuals where I had committed but was no longer passionate and said, I need to step away. And what I learned is that through that process, not only was I finding my own voice, but I was actually opening up opportunities for others, because I was filling this role, maybe not doing it to my best because I wasn't as passionate about it as I was when I took the commitment that someone else is deeply passionate about. And so, by my just being authentic, by my being vulnerable, by my risking the opportunity that they would be upset with me, to speak my truth and say, look, I don't have the same commitment as I had before. And I'm making the choice to step back. In a couple of those situations, there had to be a transition period. But my willingness to bring it to the table, when I look back now, there are two people in particular in two different positions that, had I not said, I'm going to make a different choice, their life trajectory would have been very different too. And they are thriving where they are now. And I don't take credit for their thriving, but I recognize that I could have been an obstacle to their growth because I was committed to some arbitrary idea that I'd made a commitment. So now I have to stick it out till the end, even though I didn't know what the end was. So if we can take a moment and be present in that moment, and then when that idea comes, to sit with it and explore it. And if you need to, find a travel partner that will explore it with you, not fix you, not tell you the answer, but let you talk through it in a way where it unfolds right for you. Because then not only what are you doing is you are giving a gift to yourself, but you are very likely also opening up opportunities for others that wouldn't have it because you're occupying a space that they're actually being called to, but your unwillingness to take a step back out of fear of disappointing, fear of not being seen as a person that's reliable. I don't know about you, Aaron, but I would much rather engage with people who are upfront, even if they don't have all the answers, and share their uncertainty than I would someone who projects certainty with nothing to back it up.
Absolutely. I think we've all had experience of that as well. With leaders we've worked with or team members we've worked with and stuff like that. And it's just it's refreshing to have somebody who's vulnerable and open and upfront and will just go, I don't know, or or oops, I made a mistake, because it's about that vulnerability, that ownership, and majority of people, not everybody, but I would say the majority of people have good intentions when they're doing stuff. So, allow them to make mistakes. And, by putting your hand up if you make a mistake, or, by owning where you're at with stuff, it gives other people the courage to do the same. And it creates a much better environment, where we can actually get along, where we can be a bit more considerate of each other, and realize actually we're all humans, we all make mistakes. Kind of let's kind of muddle through together almost, and kind of
Right,
explore where
right.
we're going.
Well, and the path to success, whatever success means to you, the path of progress requires us to be real. And and while it might not be an easier journey, it is a simpler journey when we can just be honest about our pros and cons, our good, our bad, when we've made a mistake, and give the same grace to someone else that we would love to have ourselves. If they've made a misstep, if they've made a choice that they and you would have made differently, what's wrong with giving them the grace to say, you know what? I don't think you did this with bad intention. How can we move forward now? As opposed to there needing to constantly be a conflict or retribution or blame, or to me, the difference between blame and accountability is a community. Accountability is more than one. Blame is always external. Accountability, we learn from the inside, and we feel from the inside, and we let that feeling be okay. And that space of, again, when someone else has made a mistake, when someone else has done something that you or they wish they had done differently, giving them the grace that you wish people would give to you when you make a misstep opens the door to genuine relationship, genuine partnership, genuine progress and growth. And, I'm a firm believer we teach people how to treat us. And so if we are willing to extend that grace, even in a moment where we don't understand, but if we can extend the grace that in a moment when they don't understand us, we are more likely to receive grace in return for whatever decision we're making that they don't agree with, because we've modeled it, we've been an example of it. And it's not easy, but I can tell you from experience, it becomes it becomes the same habit. Extending grace can become the same habit as extending blame. We're just replacing one with the other, and one leaves us so much more fulfilled than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we kind of take ownership of things, so especially, it just makes me think of a work environment really. So when we're kind of in work, and somebody makes a mistake, rather than blame that person, we can also look at ourselves and go, well, could I have done anything to help them out? You know, did or if you're a manager or leader, did I was I clear? Did I actually explain what they needed to do? And was I sure, A, that they had maybe the training or the capability to do what I was asking them to do? Or did I just throw this task on them and expect them to do it? And then when it's gone wrong, blame them for it going wrong, rather than accepting and realizing that actually they probably needed a bit of guidance, a bit of support. Maybe it wasn't the best person for that particular job, you know. Maybe I
What
wasn't
role did I
clear in what.
play? Yeah,
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear in laying out what I actually wanted them to achieve. Yeah, and and then the answer seems to be then, oh, you messed up, so next time I'm going to micromanage you. I'm going to tell you step by step. This is how you got to do it, rather than say, this is the task. I want you to achieve this. Um, because allowing them the creativity, they might find a better way of doing something, and it might improve processes and everything else. But yeah, it gets frustrating that people don't take that ownership and support each other when there's kind of mistakes and learning that can happen really.
absolutely. And it's to me, that's one of those spaces where everybody wins. And it's not that there's not a moment where we take a step back. Well, we've been taught in society that a step back is bad. If you're going backwards, that's not good. But I don't know about you, I can't do the cha-cha without taking a step back, and the cha-cha doesn't exist without the stepping back in conjunction with the stepping forward. And so it becomes this space when something goes wrong or something goes awry or it doesn't unfold the way we expected it to, is having those moments of really looking at what was my role in it, whether I was the employee or the manager or the supervisor or just the chick across the office that overheard and saw, but didn't have the courage to either support one idea or another or introduce a conversation that might have helped that unfold differently. It's like we so often, I think we are so fearful of retribution that, I mean, just like on the street, you see that, these individuals that, um, they will harm someone else. They will, just go out and hit somebody, and people on the street just keep walking. And the fear of retribution versus just acknowledging what we're called to be as compassionate and grace filled human beings, it just shifts the entire way that the world shows up. And we've talked about everything from just a one-on-one relationship to society watching someone do something in public and allowing that to happen. And so for me, that's why it proves that this idea of leading with grace and compassion and vulnerability, being honest and authentic and aware, that space is what actually will allow us to move forward, as opposed to feeling stagnant or feeling like we are almost reverting as a society in the evolution of who we are.
Yeah, and I
So we
think
get to
everybody
be
can do.
changers.
Yeah, and I think everybody can do that, and I think especially important for people who have kind of a position of influence, be that a leader, be it a parent, anybody who kind of others are looking to model their behavior on. If we do that, then that'll create that environment really. Whereas if we're living in that blame culture where we're blaming people for everything, then they will equally replicate that behavior and they will start blaming. Soon as something goes wrong, oh well, it wasn't me, it was so and so. They did that,
Right.
and it just creates a toxic culture. It's awful.
Yeah. The idea that I don't know is not a bad thing. The idea that I don't know is actually an invitation to learn. It's an invitation to grow. And yet, our society would teach us that I don't know is not an okay answer. And I'm here to tell you in my own experience that when I am willing and able to admit that I don't know, not only do I learn more, but my relationships around me are more authentic because people trust what I have to share. Even if trusting, if even if trusting is because I'd say I don't know. Let's figure it out together, or can you help me? And there's just this fear that we need to learn to move beyond, that allows us to show up right where we're at and for that to be perfectly okay.
Absolutely. Babs, where can people find you if they want to kind of get in touch with you or learn a bit more about you?
Uh, I make it really easy. I'm sure in the show notes or in the podcast episode, Aaron, you're going to have the spelling of my name, Amy Lynn Carroll, and that's where I am everywhere. My website is Amy Lynn Carroll, Instagram, Facebook, all of them are Amy Lynn Carroll. And I really want to invite people, if you are looking for someone just to listen, if you just need to talk, because I believe that as we talk, we actually learn about ourselves. On my website is a voicemail feature. where you literally can call and leave me a voicemail message on my website, and I will reach back out to you. So if you don't want to type it and you don't want to text it, leave me a message, because I am a travel partner. That is my calling. And I want to be for you who I wish had been present for me in my darkest moments.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to be had from that, from somebody you can talk to and will listen for a start. Listen not to just to reply, but listen to actually understand, and that's the key, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and allow that kind of space for people to explore and to ask questions of themselves and of life in general, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't believe that any of us need to be fixed, because not a single one of us are broken. But what we could use is someone to just listen and see us for who we really are and help us celebrate that.
Absolutely. I'm gonna bring this episode to a close, Babs. Do you have any kind of final thoughts or messages that you want to leave people with?
No final thoughts, just listen to that inner voice. Listen to that inner voice. And it may not be the easiest thing to find, whatever that inner voice is directing you to, but don't ignore it for the external voices that would love to shout it out, to distract from it. What you have to say, what you have to offer, who you are is very valuable to this world. And finding a way to live that out loud is why we're here. I encourage you to do so.
I love that. Thank you so much for being on the show. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you, Babs.
Absolutely. Love to be here.
No problem. Thank you. Take care.